A view of American life during the 1940s. Do you remember those family stories about when life moved slower, was tougher, but felt closer? Let's travel back to the 1940s, a decade of daily hardships and quiet heroism. How did people hold on to hope and joy amid so much uncertainty? Join us as we rediscover the resilience and unity that carried America through its darkest days. The dawn of a new era, from the Great Depression to war. Let me take you back to a time that perhaps your grandparents still hold deep memories of, a period of immense challenge, where every day was a quiet battle. The shadow of the Great Depression. Before the 1940s even began, the landscape of America was still shrouded in the deep darkness of the Great Depression of the 1930s. Can you imagine a time when not just homes and farmlands, but even dreams seemed to be swallowed by despair? Life back then was truly difficult. People struggled just to find enough food, clothing, and shelter. It was a relentless fight, where every penny, every piece of bread, was as precious as gold. Simple family meals, carefully patched old clothes, and rickety homes became common sights of daily life. Entertainment, something we take for granted today, became a luxury, non-essential, and cut first when money was tight. Can you imagine a life where even the small joy of a movie screening or a concert was out of reach? Yet, even in those dark times, Americans found incredible creativity. They learned to make do with what they had, turning old into new, and finding unique solutions to survive. It was a time of quiet sacrifices, where neighbors shared meals, and strangers helped each other without asking for anything in return. And above all, it was the power of community coming together to face adversity. Streets became places where everyone worked through difficulties together. No one was left behind. It wasn't just solidarity, but an indomitable spirit, a powerful will to rise, like seedlings sprouting through dry soil. The call to war and a fateful change. But then a louder call echoed across the world, pulling America out of its domestic concerns. World War II, which broke out in 1939 and lasted until 1945, touched every aspect of American life, completely changing the nation's destiny. Do you remember the stories of this powerful transformation? Initially, the United States maintained neutrality. After World War I, many Americans didn't want their country to be drawn into another global conflict. Isolationism was a strong ideology, keeping the U.S. out of the war raging in Europe and Asia. But then, public opinion gradually shifted. News of the devastation, of the aggression by fascist and militaristic powers, stirred the American conscience. Despite much debate, more and more people realized that the world's security was their own security. And then, the fateful event occurred, the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, a day President Franklin D. Roosevelt called a date which will live in infamy, forced the U.S. to officially enter the war. This event awakened a sleeping giant, turning isolationism into a thing of the past and ushering in a new era of global intervention. No one could forget that day, as news of the surprise attack spread across the country, turning fear into ironclad determination. Throughout this difficult period, one great figure stood at the helm: Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. He led the United States from 1933 until his death in 1945, navigating both the Great Depression and World War II. He is the only president in U.S. history to be elected to 4 consecutive terms. Can you imagine the weight on the shoulders of a man who had to lead a nation through the 2 greatest crises in its history? His New Deal policies helped lift the country out of the Great Depression, and then he dedicated himself to mobilizing the entire nation's strength for war. Under his leadership, the federal government orchestrated a massive economic mobilization, transforming factories that produced consumer goods into workshops producing weapons, tanks, and aircraft. A resurgent economy. Remarkably, it was this wartime mobilization that ignited an unprecedented economic recovery. It propelled industrial production to new heights and ultimately pulled the country out of the financial difficulties characteristic of the Great Depression era. Can you imagine an economy deep in crisis suddenly roaring back to life? The U.S. economy grew at an astonishing pace. Gross national product, GNP, soared from $91.1 billion in 1939 to $213.6 billion in 1945. This was an outstanding growth, transforming America into the arsenal of democracy. The long-standing unemployment problem after the Great Depression was completely resolved. The unemployment rate sharply declined from 9.9% in 1941 to 1.9% in 1943 and 1.2% in 1944. This was a record low in U.S. history, creating 17 million new jobs. Millions of people, from women to African Americans who were previously marginalized, now had the opportunity to contribute to the economy and find stable work. Government spending also increased significantly, from 8% of GDP in 1932 to 10.2% of GDP in 1936. This demonstrates the government's increasingly strong interventionist role, not only in managing the economy, but also in reshaping society as a whole. Factories operated at full capacity, cities bustled with enthusiastic workers, and a new spirit of optimism began to spread across the country, even as the war raged fiercely. This is a powerful testament to how, when faced with challenges, a nation can transform and rise stronger. Daily life under rationing. After the United States officially entered World War II, daily life for ordinary citizens changed profoundly. Though not on the front lines, every family became a part of the Great War effort. Can you imagine a life where everything, from gasoline to sugar and milk, required ration stamps? Ration stamps and victory gardens. To ensure resources for the war, a widespread rationing program was established in the spring of 1942. This program set strict limits on the amount of gasoline, food, and clothing consumers could buy. Families were issued ration books to purchase their allotments of everything, from meat, sugar, fats, butter, fruits and vegetables, to gasoline, tires, clothing, and fuel oil. Everything was tightly controlled. This meant every American had to learn to live frugally, making the most of what they had. Do you remember stories your grandparents told about waiting in long lines for their ration stamps, or carefully budgeting to make sure supplies lasted the entire week? But precisely in those difficulties, the spirit of community became stronger than ever. Communities actively participated in scrap drives. Old rubber, tin, kitchen fats, old newspapers, wood, steel, all were collected and recycled to support the war effort. This wasn't just collecting trash, it was an act of patriotism, a tangible contribution from every citizen. Alongside this, the Victory Gardens movement spread across the country. People grew their own food, reducing the burden on the distribution system and demonstrating the spirit of, "We're all in this together." From small backyard plots to empty lots in parks, millions of Victory Gardens sprang up, transforming every citizen into a quiet soldier on the home front. Do you remember any stories about ration stamps or Victory Gardens that your grandparents used to tell? Share your memories in the comments below. Wartime spending and income. Everyday life in the 1940s was very different from today, something our generation might find hard to imagine. In 1940, the minimum wage ranged from 30 cents to 40 cents per hour, with an average annual income of $1,299. Can you picture how people would manage their expenses with that income? Prices were also very different back then. A pack of 20 cigarettes cost about 15 cents. Coffee averaged 21 cents a pound. milk delivered to your home was about 52 cents a gallon, and gasoline was 18 cents a gallon. The average home value in 1940 was $2,938. These numbers paint a completely different picture of the value of money and the cost of living. Car ownership was relatively common, with 51% of families owning a car in 1941, increasing to 56% by 1949. This shows that cars had become an essential mode of transportation, even if they were older models and required rationed gas. However, telephone ownership was less common, with only 46% of households having a phone in 1945. This meant communication primarily relied on letters or in-person meetings, fostering stronger community bonds. By 1947, food accounted for nearly 1/3 of total consumer spending. This reflects the importance of ensuring enough food for every family, especially in a context of scarcity and rationing. Family and community adaptation. Amidst these difficulties, families had to adapt in extraordinary ways. Mothers often meticulously mended clothes and even sewed shirts and dresses from flour sacks or feed bags. Can you believe it? These bags often came with printed patterns, transforming them into creative sewing material. It was a way to save every penny, while also showcasing the ingenuity and resourcefulness of American women. A family usually had only one car. Travel was often carefully planned to save gasoline. Laundry was often taken to a professional laundry service. Wet clothes were brought home to be line-dried outdoors, and then a lot of ironing was needed. This shows the lack of conveniences compared to today. Homes often didn't have air conditioning or hair dryers. Hot summers or cold winters had to be endured with traditional solutions and human resilience. Mothers typically cooked 3 meals a day, but family dinners were rare because fathers often worked very late, sometimes 7 days a week, to support the war effort. It was a life where personal sacrifice for the common good was self-evident. But it was precisely in this challenging context that community cooperation and government intervention, though sometimes hesitant and imperfect, played an extremely important role in helping the United States and its people overcome the darkest period of the Great Depression and confront the war. It was a decade where the "we're all in this together" spirit was most clearly demonstrated. Rosie the Riveter and the rise of women. Imagine a world where the role of women was redefined in just a few short years. A world where women, our grandmothers, stepped out of the kitchen and changed an entire nation. The 1940s was that time, and the image of Rosie the Riveter became a vivid symbol of this great transformation. Golden opportunities during wartime. As millions of American men were drafted to fight in the war, a severe labor shortage emerged in factories and industries. The government had to launch strong propaganda campaigns to recruit women into professions previously dominated by men. Can you imagine the shock this change caused to social norms at the time? These efforts led to a sharp increase in the number of women working in the defense industry, non-combat military roles, and healthcare. They worked in factories producing aircraft, weapons, and ships, and took on support roles for the military, from driving trucks to repairing machinery. The image of Rosie the Riveter, with her flexed bicep and determined face, became a symbol for millions of American women who entered the workforce to support the war effort. Before 1940, less than 15% of married women held paid employment, but the war changed this dramatically. Millions of women entered the workforce, proving their capabilities and dedication. Challenging social stereotypes. Women overcame significant discriminatory barriers and challenged traditional social norms with their crucial wartime labor contributions. They not only performed physically demanding and skilled jobs previously reserved for men, but also faced skepticism and prejudice from a segment of society. Recruitment campaigns for the Women's Army Corps popularized idealized images of military women who combined traditional beauty with wartime strength. For example, A WAC recruitment poster titled "Woman's Place in War" redefined the meaning of the common phrase, "A woman's place is in the home." It illustrated that World War II redefined the roles of American women in society, expanding their space from the kitchen to the factory floor and military barracks. Similarly, the Cadet Nurse Corps' recruitment campaign portrayed nursing as a proud profession, elevating the status of women in this noble work. A lasting legacy. Although after the war there were efforts to push women back into traditional domestic roles, with millions of women being laid off to make way for returning male veterans, fashion trends also reverted to dresses and girdles instead of practical pants and jackets. Can you feel the social pressure to return to normalcy after the war ended? However, women's wartime contributions left long-lasting positive impacts on female employment, permanently changing American gender roles. By 1947, the proportion of women in the workforce had returned to 1940 levels. This shows that despite an immediate post-war decline, women continued to seek and maintain their positions in the economy. Women's participation in paid work outside the home helped them gain social respect and experience managing household finances. They challenged the idea that they belonged only in the private sphere and became a powerful force in the public space, moving one step closer to equality. These changes also foreshadowed permanent employment opportunities for women in the 1970s and 1980s. It can be said that Rosie the Riveter was not just a wartime icon, but also a pioneer for the later feminist movement. A multifaceted social landscape, opportunities and challenges. The 1940s presented a colorful social tapestry, but it was not without its dark threads. While the war opened new opportunities for some groups, it also brought painful challenges and injustices for others. New opportunities for African Americans. World War II spurred economic growth and created a massive demand for labor. This opened up employment opportunities and raised the social standing of African Americans. Did you know that before the war, many African Americans faced severe discrimination in jobs and opportunities for advancement? New Deal relief programs, especially the Works Progress Administration, so WPA, provided a crucial economic floor for the Black community in the 1930s. The WPA, as a primary source of income, was compared to agriculture and domestic service in terms of its importance in generating income for African Americans. Jobs in war factories brought higher wages and stability they had never experienced before. This not only improved their material lives, but also sparked hope for a more equal future. Severe challenges for Japanese Americans. While African Americans saw glimmers of hope, Japanese American citizens became victims of the most severe discrimination during the war years. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, fears of terrorism, espionage, and sabotage spread across the United States. Baseless fear and racial prejudice led to a regrettable act in history. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066. This order forced approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans living on the California coast to leave their homes, jobs, and possessions and be incarcerated in internment camps deep inland. They were stripped of their freedoms solely because of their ethnic origin. Regardless of whether they were U.S. citizens or not, their families were separated, property lost, and lives completely overturned. Additionally, about 600,000 Italian permanent residents and some non-naturalized German citizens also faced travel restrictions after Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy declared war on the United States in December 1941. However, these restrictions for Italians were lifted in October 1942, much earlier than for Japanese Americans. This incident remains a dark stain on President Roosevelt's human rights record. It reminds us of the painful consequences of fear and prejudice during wartime. Family and community life. In the 1940s, family and community life also had distinct characteristics that many of us today might no longer see. Schools were still segregated in some places, especially in the South. Black and white children attended separate schools, reflecting the deep divisions in society. Children living during wartime also had special experiences. Many schools held air raid drills, where children were instructed on how to take cover and protect themselves in case of an attack. It was a scary, but unavoidable part of their lives. However, children's lives weren't only about war. They still found joy in simple outdoor games like tag or Mother May I. They played innocently until the streetlights came on, signaling it was time to go home. Looking back at the 1940s, what about everyday life in America surprises you the most? Comment below. Light in the darkness, entertainment and spirit. Even during the darkest years of the war, Americans found small rays of light in their daily lives, especially through entertainment. Hollywood, music, and radio became close companions, helping to soothe anxieties and boost the morale of an entire nation. Hollywood and the power of propaganda. Throughout World War II, the American film industry received strong support from the government. This was because cinema had an excellent ability to boost public morale, convey messages, and strengthen the will to fight. Can you recall those old movie theaters with wooden seats, where everyone watched emotional films together? Audiences typically watched newsreels, about 10 minutes long, filled with images and reports of recent battles. These newsreels helped the public stay updated on the war situation, creating a sense of connection to the front lines. Following that would be a cartoon. Many cartoons even caricatured the enemy, sometimes with racist imagery, reflecting the prevailing views of the time. Documentaries also played an important role. Frank Capra's 7-part Why We Fight series, released from 1943 to 1945, emphasized the necessity of U.S. involvement in the war and the importance of Allied victory. These films were not only entertaining, but also powerful propaganda tools, strengthening patriotism. Famous Hollywood stars like Clark Gable and Jimmy Stewart enlisted and participated in combat missions. Their involvement not only boosted morale for the military, but also for the public, showing that everyone contributed to the war. Highly acclaimed films of this period include Casablanca, a classic story of love and sacrifice; Mrs. Miniver, a film about family resilience during wartime; Going My Way, which earned Bing Crosby an Oscar in 1944; and Yankee Doodle Dandy, an inspiring musical. Hollywood truly became a spiritual front. Evocative music. As the United States plunged into war, people listened more to patriotic or war-related music. Music became the voice of an entire generation. Songs captured the emotions of wartime, expressing the longing of loved ones separated by distance. Tunes like I'll Walk Alone, Shoo Shoo Baby, I'm Making Believe, and I'll Be Seeing You became popular. These were soft, emotional melodies that helped soothe the souls of soldiers on the front lines and their loved ones on the home front. In particular, the song I'll Be Home by Christmas, 1943, had a poignant note, topping the charts for 11 weeks. Bing Crosby's version, along with countless others, remained very popular. This song touched the hearts of millions, conveying the dream of a peaceful reunion. Radio and big band concert programs, like Glenn Miller's, brought music directly to listeners across America. Music was not just entertainment, it was hope, a thread connecting millions of hearts during the war. Radio and everyday life. Can you imagine a time without the internet, without cable TV, when even TV wasn't widespread? Radio was the primary source of news and entertainment for most American families during the war. Every evening, people increasingly relied on the radio for updates about the war overseas. Families often gathered around the radio every evening, usually in the kitchen, to listen to news and entertainment programs. It was a daily ritual where everyone collectively listened to stories, music, and important messages from the government. Besides war news, Entertainment programs were also diverse, from humorous comedy shows to big band musical performances. Laughter and music helped to alleviate some of the worries. Some jazz lovers even risked not going to bomb shelters just to listen to recordings. They felt safe listening to music, a testament to the soothing power of music in the worst of times. Radio was not just a device. It was a family member, a bridge to the outside world, bringing both news and comfort. In the 1940s, if you could choose one favorite form of entertainment, movies, music, radio, what would it be? Let us know. Great strides in technology. While the world was engulfed in the smoke and fire of war, another quiet revolution was taking place in laboratories and research workshops. The 1940s was not only an era of war, but also a crucial germination period for the development of information technology, IT. Inventions from this period laid a solid foundation for the smart electronic devices and diverse software applications we use today. The genesis of information technology. Can you imagine that the first colossal, cumbersome computers were born precisely during World War II, out of the need for faster, more accurate calculations to serve the war effort? Key inventions during this period included the ENIAC computer and the transistor. They weren't just simple machines. They were the first bricks in building the modern technological world. ENIAC, the giant that started the computer era. In 1945, a colossal machine was born named ENIAC, Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. ENIAC became the world's first electronic computer. It was developed during World War II with the initial purpose of calculating firing tables for the U.S. Army artillery. This was an extremely important task, requiring speed and accuracy that humans could not achieve. ENIAC was a massive machine, occupying 167 square meters, equivalent to a tennis court, and weighing about 27 tons, as heavy as a large truck. Despite its size, it was 1,000 times faster than previous mechanical calculators, marking a breakthrough at the time. To build ENIAC, about 17,468 vacuum tubes were needed, and these tubes frequently broke down and required replacement. Programming ENIAC was difficult and time-consuming, using wires and switches similar to a telephone switchboard. Can you imagine a room full of wires and switches where engineers had to work meticulously to program this machine? ENIAC was a precursor to the development of other electronic computers, which were later used for various purposes. From calculating missile trajectories to weather forecasting and atomic energy research, ENIAC opened the door to a new era of computation and automation. The transistor, a historical turning point in technology, 1947. Just 2 years after ENIAC's debut, an even more revolutionary invention appeared. The invention of the transistor in 1947 at Bell Labs by William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain was a significant breakthrough. It ushered in an era of miniaturization, increased efficiency, and reduced costs for electronic devices. Previously, electronic devices used bulky vacuum tubes that consumed a lot of power and were prone to breaking down. Transistors were different. They were compact and much more efficient. This invention laid the foundation for the rapid development of technology in the following decades. It led to the advent of integrated circuits, ICs, and paved the way for the miniaturization of electronic devices. From compact pocket calculators to the smartphone you hold in your hand, all originated from this great invention. The advent of the transistor is one of the most important inventions in human history, serving as a fundamental pillar for the development of modern electronic devices, shaping our world today. Leadership and global politics. The 1940s was not only a period of changes in daily life and technology, but also a crucial chapter in the history of leadership and global politics. This was the stage where America soared, transforming from a nation with an isolationist mindset into a global superpower. FDR, the President during crisis and war. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States, served from 1933 to 1945 and was a central figure in world events during the first half of the 20th century. Can you imagine the immense burden he carried leading a nation through the two greatest crises in modern history? He led the federal government through most of the Great Depression with his ambitious New Deal program. The New Deal was not just a package of economic policies, but a new philosophy about the government's role in people's lives, bringing hope and jobs to millions. His third and fourth terms were entirely dominated by World War II. FDR provided strong diplomatic and financial support to the Allies. He supplied weapons, food, and essential supplies to China, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program, totaling a colossal $50 billion from 1941 to 1945. This was a groundbreaking program, demonstrating America's determination to support Allied nations even before officially entering the war. From isolationism to intervention. Before the war, the U.S. pursued isolationism. After the losses of World War I, many Americans did not want their country to intervene in conflicts in Europe and Asia again. But the attack on Pearl Harbor changed everything. It was an electric shock that awakened an entire nation. On December 8, 1941, President Roosevelt officially declared war on Japan. Just 3 days later, when Germany and Italy declared war on the U.S., in response on December 11, 1941, the U.S. officially entered the European theater. This was the moment when America completely abandoned isolationism, accepting its role on the world stage. FDR oversaw the mobilization of the entire U.S. economy to support the war and implemented the Europe First strategy. This meant defeating Nazi Germany before focusing all efforts on Japan. This was a crucial strategic decision that shaped the course of the war. His administration also oversaw the construction of the Pentagon, a symbol of American military might, and initiated the development of the world's first atomic bomb, an invention that completely changed the landscape of warfare and geopolitics thereafter. America becomes a superpower. Under FDR's skillful leadership, the United States emerged as a global superpower after the war. America came out of the war with relatively low casualties, around 330,000 lives, accounting for 0.2% of its population. This figure sharply contrasts with Britain, 1% of its population, and the Soviet Union, 16% of its population nations, that suffered far more terrible losses. The U.S. accounted for nearly 60% of global industrial output, transforming the country into a massive factory producing goods for the entire world. The U.S. also held 3/4 of the world's gold reserves and was the world's largest creditor. This overwhelming economic and military power elevated the U.S. to global leadership, ushering in a new era of Pax Americana. A view of American life during the 1930s. Do you remember those old stories passed down from grandparents or parents? Tales of a time when life moved slower, felt tougher, but hearts were closer. Today we're traveling back to one of America's most challenging eras, the 1930s, the age of the Great Depression. This wasn't just a chapter in textbooks, it was a daily struggle for millions. What did everyday life really look like? How did families find hope and small joys in such darkness? Join us as we rediscover a decade shaped by grit, resilience, and the deep bonds that held communities together. Each family, each individual, had their own circumstances, their own story. But there were many surprisingly common points in how they coped, saved, and adapted to their new lives. And at the heart of that home was often a silent hero. Mother, the woman of the family, became the main pillar in managing the household. Their responsibility was heavier than ever before, having to run everything on an unprecedentedly tight budget. They had to calculate every tiny penny, had to make something out of nothing, had to invent new ways for every family member to still have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and warmth. The resourcefulness and capability of women during this period is an admirable story. Let's take a look at a typical week for a housewife in the 1930s. Monday was often laundry day. Although washing machines were starting to appear and save labor, they were still a luxury. For the vast majority of families, especially those facing hardship, hand washing on a washboard remained the common method. This job required a lot of strength, scrubbing each piece of clothing, rinsing multiple times. After washing, clothes were hung outdoors to dry. They maximized the use of sunlight and wind to dry clothes, both saving energy and making the clothes smell fresh. Next was Tuesday, often ironing day. Like washing machines, electric irons were on the market, but not every household could afford one. Many women still had to use heavy cast iron irons. You know, these irons weren't plugged in. They had to be heated on a coal or wood stove. Imagine lifting a heavy iron, moving it skillfully over clothes while ensuring it was hot enough to smooth out wrinkles, but not too hot to burn the fabric. That job required strength, carefulness, and experience. Just small tasks like washing and ironing show the hardship and skill of the women of that time. When money became so tight, things that were once very ordinary, very readily available, suddenly turned into luxuries people didn't dare dream of. Going to the barber or hairdresser became too expensive. People cut hair for each other, or chose the simplest hairstyles possible. Routine health care, which was not as common as today, was even more drastically cut back. Regular dental checkups? No money. Even seeing a doctor for a minor illness required deliberation. The health of the whole family now relied mainly on Truyen folk remedies, self-care, or simply enduring. Only when the illness was too severe, when it couldn't be endured any longer, did people seek medical help. Another thoughtful story about saving money is childbirth. Hospital childbirth costs could be very high. To save that money, some women chose to give birth at home. They sought the help of experienced midwives in the community, or simply family members who had knowledge about this. Home birth carried more risks, but in that circumstance, saving money became the top priority. Clothes and shoes. They were no longer something that could be casually bought new whenever an old one broke or went out of style. They had to be used to the fullest extent, patched carefully over and over again. They were patched until they couldn't be patched anymore, until they were completely ragged. Only then was replacement considered. Can you believe that in situations of extreme hardship, some families had to patch worn-out shoes by cutting pieces of rubber from old, unused tires? Imagine that, a rough piece of tire temporarily sewn onto the sole of a shoe. That wasn't just creativity, it was an expression of desperation and the effort to cling to life. Even families who had a relatively comfortable life before the Depression had to get used to new concepts. For example, having children wear hand-me-downs from older siblings. Clothes were passed down from one person to another in the family. Wearing hand-me-downs could make children feel uncomfortable, sometimes ashamed among friends. But during that era, personal pride had to step aside, giving way to the existence, the survival of the whole family. The most important thing was to have something to wear, not whether it was beautiful or fashionable. Facing harsh winters, heating the entire house was a huge expense that few families could afford. What was their solution? Instead of heating the whole house, families focused on heating only one room. Often it was the living room where there was a fireplace, or the kitchen where there was warmth from the stove. The whole family would gather together in that warm room, chatting, doing activities together to share warmth, and also to save energy. They used various sources of fuel, anything that could burn to keep the fire going. It could be wood gathered from forests or ruins. It could be coal if they could afford it. Or sometimes, in the most desperate times, They had to even use dried corn cobs for heating. Think about that harshness, when precious fuel was so scarce that they had to use even the discarded parts of agricultural products. In an effort to save costs and especially to support each other, a notable trend emerged. Many families and relatives decided to live together. Several generations lived under one roof. This helped them share the burden of living expenses. Rent, electricity, water, and food were shared among multiple people. They also shared their meager resources. Those who had jobs shared their wages. Those without jobs took care of the house, children, or went out to find food or fuel. Living together not only helped alleviate financial burdens, but also strengthened family bonds, was a great source of encouragement during difficult days. The saving, the resourcefulness, the silent sacrifice of mothers and wives, and the effort of every family member during that time are undeniable living proof of the traditional values of hard work, self-reliance, and extraordinary coping ability of the American people. Even in the harshest circumstances, when everything seemed to be against them, they found every way to cope, to keep the family flame from going out, so that members still had a place to return to, someone to love and rely on. What do these stories remind you of? Perhaps your grandmother's ingenuity, your mother's hard work, or memories of the whole family gathering in one warm room in the winter? Please share with us in the comments below. The context: a difficult time, the 1930s. As we know, the 1930s were defined by a historical event of immense impact, shaking the entire world. That event was the Great Depression. It all began on a dark Tuesday in 1929, the stock market crash on Wall Street. But don't be mistaken, this wasn't just a problem for tycoons or investors. In the blink of an eye, its impact quickly spread throughout the entire economy, seeping into every small corner of society, becoming the worst and longest economic downturn in the entire history of modern industry. The destructive power of the Great Depression was truly horrific, far beyond any prediction. The most frightening and perhaps most haunting number was the unemployment rate. It skyrocketed to an unbelievable level, reaching 25% of the population. Stop for a moment and try to imagine what this number means in real life. This means that an estimated 13 to 15 million Americans were completely jobless. Think about it, out of every 4 adults you met on the street, one person couldn't find any work to support themselves and their families. 4 people. Such a huge, heartbreaking number. It's hard to imagine. Fathers, husbands, the pillars of families, who perhaps previously held important positions in companies. What were they doing now to earn food for their wives and children? How great was the despair when they had to search for food in garbage cans? It wasn't just about lacking money. It was about losing self-respect, losing their role in the family. Finding a new job seemed to become an impossible task. It's said that a small job posting for just 6 open positions could attract the interest and applications of over 15,000 people. Think about that fierce competition. The hope of finding a job was incredibly fragile, like searching for a needle in a haystack. Unable to find work at home, what did many men in extreme despair have to do? They became hobos. They illegally hopped freight trains, accepting a dangerous, nomadic, homeless life, moving from town to town. Their only purpose was to hope to find even a small opportunity, a temporary job in a distant place. Life on those trains was incredibly harsh, full of risks and uncertainties. And even those who were luckier, who still kept their jobs, was their life much easier? The answer is no. They had to witness their wages being brutally cut, potentially up to 60%. The money earned was already meager, and now it was worth even less due to the recession. Purchasing power decreased. Everything became more expensive relative to their ability to pay. As if the economic challenges weren't enough, life became much worse for residents living in the vast Great Plains region. this area had to endure another natural disaster that history calls the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl wasn't just strong winds. It was, quite literally, giant dust storms. These storms were the horrifying result of a combination of prolonged drought, strong winds, and misguided agricultural practices that had eroded the land over many years. These dust storms destroyed the land terribly. Fertile fields, once the source of life for hundreds of thousands of farming families, turned into dust deserts after the storms. Dust covered everything. The sky turned a frightening reddish-brown. The air was so thick it was impossible to breathe normally. Life there became unsustainable. What was the consequence? Hundreds of thousands of farming families were forced to abandon their homes, leaving everything they had, and embark on a directionless journey to seek a new life in the distant West, mainly California. They were often called Okies, although not all were from Oklahoma. Their stories of immense hardship and sacrifice were realistically portrayed in classic works like The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and through the moving photographs of photographer Dorothea Lange, especially the image Migrant Mother. These works are powerful reminders of the extraordinary human spirit during that era. That's the overall picture of the context of the 1930s, a bleak picture of widespread poverty, unemployment, and compounding natural disasters. It sounds like it was just about difficulty and loss, doesn't it? But, precisely, within that grim, challenging picture, the sparks of resilience, perseverance, and especially human kindness shone brighter and more admirable than ever before. So, amidst that harsh backdrop, what was everyday life like at home? How did they cope with the difficulties? We will explore that now. Life at home, coping and saving. In the challenging context of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, the home, the family shelter, became the most important sanctuary, the last fortress where everyone could come together to weather the storm. Entertainment and spirit, light in the dark. When life revolved solely around how to have enough to eat, clothes to wear, and a place to live, entertainment suddenly became something too distant, too luxurious. When money was that tight, people had to cut non-essential expenses first, and entertainment was certainly one of the first things to be cut. Going to the movies at the cinema, once a very popular pastime for all classes in the years before the Depression, now became a luxury that most people could no longer afford. The consequence of this was clear. Over a third of movie theaters across the United States were forced to close due to lack of audiences. Imagine the scene of movie theaters that were once lit up, crowded, now silent, and permanently closed. That is a symbol of loss in cultural life. But humans always have an extraordinary ability, the ability to find joy, to find light, even in the darkness. When they couldn't go to the movies, they turned to another form of entertainment, much more popular, much more accessible. That was the radio. The old radio, with its sometimes crackly, sometimes clear sound, became the centerpiece of many homes in the 1930s. It was the main source of entertainment, running continuously throughout the day, from early morning until late at night. The radio didn't just bring information, it brought the outside world, brought stories, songs, and most importantly, brought connection and joy. During the day, the radio was for housewives. They listened to soap operas, stories about love, family, drama, captivating and engaging, helping them forget some of the worries and hardships of daily life. After school, the radio served children. There were dramatic action and adventure programs specifically for young listeners. Children sat and listened, imagining exciting scenes, transforming into their favorite characters. And perhaps the most sacred moment of the day was the evening. That was when the whole family gathered around the radio, listening together to a broadcast. It could be the news update. It could be a comedy show to laugh heartily together, or a lively live musical performance. The moment when the whole family sat together, sharing a single entertainment experience, created strong bonds, a beautiful memory amidst the chaos and difficulty. If not listening to the radio, families could choose other forms of home entertainment. Playing board games became very popular in the 1930s. Board games were an inexpensive form of entertainment, could be played over and over, and, importantly, required the participation of multiple people. They encouraged interaction, friendly competition, and laughter within the family. One of the famous board games born during this period was the game Sorry. Launched in 1934, Sorry quickly became loved by many families because of its simple but surprising rules. But speaking of the most successful during the Great Depression, we must mention the game Monopoly. The interesting and slightly ironic thing is that this game appeared precisely during the most difficult years, when money was the scarcest thing. Yet, Monopoly allowed players to freely buy and sell, build property, own hotels and famous streets, with huge amounts of money. That money, that wealth, perhaps was something they could only dream of having in real life. Perhaps Monopoly was a way for people to temporarily escape the harsh reality, to live in a virtual world where they were rich and successful. It must have been so. Besides home entertainment, there were also public forms of entertainment that were affordable. Mini golf became a real craze in the 1930s. Over 30,000 mini golf courses sprang up across the country. The cost per game was only 25 to 50 cents. This was a very affordable cost, allowing many working people to participate. Mini golf offered a little challenge, a little competition, and importantly, a chance to get outside, breathe fresh air, and have a few hours of fun. No matter how hard life was, no matter how heavy the burden of making a living, people always found ways to entertain themselves. Entertainment to temporarily forget worries, to find small smiles. And most importantly, these forms of entertainment, whether sitting by the radio or playing board games, were opportunities to gather with family, share happy moments together. It helped strengthen bonds between members, was invaluable spiritual encouragement. This once again proves the resilience, the ability to find joy, to find light, even in the darkest adversity of the American people at that time. They did not let difficulties completely crush their spirit. They found ways to keep the flame of hope from being extinguished. What movie or radio program from your grandparents' time do you still remember? Is there an old toy that just mentioning its name makes you smile? Let's look back together. Eating, hard times, meals, and creativity. If we talk about the biggest challenges in daily life in America in the 1930s, then the story of food is surely one of the most haunting. Food became scarce for many people. It was no longer a matter of eating well or poorly, but a matter of having enough to eat or not. Things we consider very familiar today, like fresh meat and vegetables, were often beyond the means of most families during that period. They were too expensive, or simply unavailable. So, how could housewives prepare meals for their families when ingredients were both expensive and scarce? They had to learn how to stretch meals. Stretching meant using cheap, easily available ingredients to make meals more filling, enough for everyone, even if perhaps not fully nutritious. Cabbage soup became a symbol of Depression-era meals. It was called the national dish. Why cabbage soup? Because cabbage was a cheap, easy-to-grow vegetable that could be cooked into a large pot of soup for the whole family to eat. It helped fill empty stomachs. Besides cabbage soup, housewives maximized their creativity. They learned how to make casseroles or one-pot meals. These dishes were often simple, easy to make, utilizing beans, potatoes, pasta, and a little meat, if available, to create a filling meal. For example, chili, a stew from meat and beans, macaroni and cheese. These dishes were cheap, easy to make, and provided enough energy. Or chipped beef on toast, shredded dried beef, cooked in a creamy sauce, and poured over toast, was also a way to turn a small amount of meat into a dish for many people. Many people who lived through that time still vividly remember the taste of these simple dishes. That taste wasn't just food, it was the taste of effort, of love. To cope with food scarcity, growing vegetables in the home garden was no longer a hobby or pleasure. It became an extremely important job, a necessity to ensure the family had food. Every empty plot of land around the house could be utilized for planting. They planted easy-to-grow, quick-harvest vegetables to supplement daily meals. The lack of resources didn't just spur individual effort, but also spread a spirit of community. In some towns and cities, local governments or organizations converted unused vacant lots into community thrift gardens. The purpose was for people without land to still have a place to grow food. They worked together in the garden, shared experiences, and harvested the results together. The food supply from these community gardens helped many people. Sources indicate that in Detroit alone, this program once provided food for about 20,000 people. It is moving to witness scenes of people who might have been office workers before, still wearing old white shirts, now covered in mud, learning how to hoe, sow seeds, and cultivate to feed themselves and their families. That is an image of adaptation, of accepting the harsh reality and doing whatever was necessary to survive. When looking back at old cookbooks from this period, like my great-grandmother's, we can't help but be surprised by the creativity and ability to thoroughly utilize every available ingredient of the women from that time. They invented recipes that today we might find very strange or too simple. There were surprisingly simple recipes using only the most basic ingredients. For example, cookies made only from lard, sugar, and flour. No butter, eggs, or milk needed. Just 3 basic ingredients could create what could be called cookies, or the dish-buttered cucumber pickles. Sounds strange, right? But it was a unique way to prepare cucumbers and add flavor with vinegar and butter. And resourcefulness with ingredients was also evident in small details. For example, pie crusts made from finely ground cornflakes. Instead of using entirely wheat flour or more expensive flours, they ground available cornflakes to make pie crusts. That was a very ingenious way not to waste anything. Recipes using common fruits like Washington apples also show creativity. They transformed apples into many different dishes, from warm baked goods to refreshing salads, so that daily meals wouldn't be too monotonous or boring. But perhaps the most haunting thing, the thing that showed the extreme hardship of this era most clearly and heartbreakingly, was the story of families forced to eat in shifts. Try to imagine, to ensure everyone had food, but with such a limited amount of food, they had to share. Some family members would eat on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, while others, perhaps siblings, would eat on Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays. And maybe, if they were lucky enough to have a little more food, the whole family would eat together for one meal on Sunday. What does that mean? It means there were days when you had to sit and watch your dearest loved ones, siblings, parents, children, go hungry while you got to eat, or vice versa. That anguish, pity, and helplessness must have been incredibly difficult emotionally. This story is a powerful reminder of the severity of the Great Depression. However, even in the most difficult, darkest times, the spirit of community was the flame that warmed people's hearts. Shared meals, often called potlucks, became very common. They were often organized by churches, charities, or simply neighbors. Each family, contributing whatever little food they had, brought it together to share with everyone. Potlucks weren't just a way for people to have a more filling meal, they were also an inexpensive form of entertainment, an opportunity for people to meet, chat, and encourage each other. These shared meals brought people closer together, reinforcing solidarity and neighborly affection. Thus, the story of food in the 1930s wasn't just about scarcity. It was also about extraordinary creativity, silent sacrifice, and the power of community when facing adversity together. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment yes to let us know you're still following. Community cooperation and government support. The Great Depression was not just a personal challenge for each family. With its scale and destructiveness, it was truly a challenge for the entire society. And precisely in these most difficult moments, the spirit of community, mutual support, was strongly promoted. People realized that no one could overcome this storm alone, and the only way to survive and rebuild was to help each other. In neighborhoods and cities, community and charitable organizations were quickly established or expanded their activities. Their main purpose was to provide support and help to the most disadvantaged, the unemployed with no income, the homeless with no shelter. Familiar images from that period are long lines of people silently queuing for charity soup. They are the warm community kitchens where people could come for a hot meal, free of charge. These were practical, humane actions, showing sharing and love between people. However, the scale of the crisis was too large. The resources of private charities, or even local governments, were insufficient to cope. Millions of people needed help, and only a larger force could make a significant difference. Therefore, the federal government, meaning the central government, began to intervene. Under the leadership of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a series of programs and policies were enacted. Collectively, they were called the New Deal. The New Deal was a significant historical turning point for the United States. It not only aimed to solve the immediate crisis, but also marked the birth of the American welfare state. The concept of a government responsible for providing a basic social safety net for its citizens was relatively new at that time. The New Deal implemented many specific programs to support the people. For example, it provided unemployment insurance to help those who lost their jobs have a small amount of money to live on while searching for new work. It provided support for dependent children, orphaned children, or those whose parents were unable to care for them. And later, a very important part of the New Deal was large-scale job creation programs. The government invested in public works such as building roads, bridges, schools, parks. These projects not only improved national infrastructure, but more importantly created millions of jobs for the unemployed, helping them earn income, regain self-respect, and contribute to society. Before the Great Depression, receiving government aid was often viewed with stigma. It was considered shameful, a sign of failure or laziness. Americans highly valued self-reliance and self-sufficiency. However, in the context of the Depression, when millions of people, including those from the middle class, hard-working people, suddenly lost everything, facing poverty and unemployment, this attitude towards receiving government assistance began to change. Having to rely on government support was no longer so shameful because it was the shared fate of so many people. Nevertheless, for many, especially those who had been independent, receiving aid was still an emotionally difficult experience. It affected their self-respect, but they understood that it was the only way to get through this extremely difficult period. The stories of migrants from the Dust Bowl, the Okies, were truthfully and hauntingly portrayed by literature and photography. The novel The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck detailed their extreme, arduous life as they left their homeland, their journey to the West, and the difficulties in seeking a new life. The iconic photographs of photographer Dorothea Lange, especially Migrant Mother, powerfully captured the suffering, resilience, and hope of these people. These works of art are not just history, but deep reminders of the great sacrifice and extraordinary spirit of humanity during that era. Community cooperation and government intervention, though sometimes hesitant and imperfect, played an extremely important role in helping the United States and its people overcome the darkest period of the Great Depression. It showed that when faced with challenges too large, unity, sharing, and support from a safety net are absolutely essential. The 1940s were a time of challenge and change. but also of incredible resilience and unity across America. Through war and hardship, everyday life transformed, opening doors to new opportunities and innovation. These stories aren't just history, they're living memories, echoing through generations. What do you remember most about the 1940s? Share your thoughts below. Your memories matter here. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe and share our channel so you don't miss the next nostalgic story.